Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. South Korean President Moon Jae-in will greet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Friday as the latter crosses a military demarcation line to enter the South for the first summit between the two sides in more than a decade. South Korean honor guards will then escort the leaders to a welcome ceremony at a plaza in Panmunjom, the border village where the summit is to be held. Kim will be accompanied by 9 officials. Among them is his sister, Kim Yo-jong, who led the North's delegation to the Winter Olympics in South Korea in February, and Kim Yong-nam, the North's nominal head of state. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what to expect from the Korea summit. Joining me on the program today are Captain Ajay Lele, Research Fellow, Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis; Meera Shankar, former ambassador; Sandeep Kumar Mishra, Associate Professor, Center for East Asian Studies, JNU; and Shilkant Sharma, former ambassador as well. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador Shankar, I'd like to begin with you. What is the significance of the Korea summit?
Well, I think it's a positive step in the sense that the last 10 years in the Koreas have pretty much been taken up by tensions between the North and the South, and mainly over North Korea's nuclear and missile program. And the international community has been looking at ways to bring that program to a halt and then roll it back. That is denuclearization, but not much headway has been made so far. Now, for the first time, North Korea has said that it is suspending tests in preparation for this summit, both nuclear tests as well as missile tests. Of course, they can always be resumed. And it's ready to engage with South Korea, perhaps as a preparation for the summit with the United States, which North Korea has been seeking for a very long time. Now, from the South Korean side, I think they're basically looking, they have said, the Ministry of Unification has said that they are looking at peace, launching discussions towards a peace treaty to conclude the armistice after the 1950-53 war, because no formal peace treaty has been signed. B, at denuclearization. C, at reduction of military tensions, and then at economic cooperation.
Sure.
What the North is looking for is less clear, but clearly the sanctions which have been ramped up over the last year have been pinching them. So I'm sure that they would be looking at easing of sanctions, recognition in a sense, if Kim sits on the same table with President Trump, talking to the US as an equal, and then at economic and financial cooperation with the South. So, but this is only the beginning of a process. You don't really know
which way it will
lead.
Yeah.
But the fact that this step has been taken, I think, is positive.
Sure. It's a positive step to start off with, is what the ambassador is suggesting. Let me bring in Captain Lele into the picture now. You know, Captain Lele, as far as North Korea and South Korea are concerned, the word denuclearization has been used a lot over the last few months, especially since the tensions have risen on the Korean peninsula. Can we expect some forward movement on that front?
I think one should expect a forward movement on that front. If you see during last 1 month, the indications which have been given by the North Korean leadership that they are keen for a constructive engagement. Recently, they have said that they are going to stop all the testing also. So I think this is one of the most forward-looking things which North Korea has done. However, there was a small rider when that announcement was made, where the North Korean leadership has said that they are going to stop the testing of missile as well as nuclear things only because they have completed their tasks. So right now they are not in a mood to immediately denuclearize the thing. The way John Bolton is looking at things, particularly saying that we want immediate action, I think they will go for a step-by-step action. Wait and watch policy will be played up. So a lot amount of a politics will be expected in days to come. But at least this is one good step. And I think one must give certain amount of a credit to the South Korean leadership too for playing it so well and ensuring that the things will not go out of the hand post Winter Olympics. And let's hope that this summit leads to a better summit which will be between the US leadership and the North Korean leadership.
Sure. You know, Ambassador Shilkant Sharma, what has changed as far as the North is concerned? What has brought about this change of mind in sitting down at the table and discussing? Have the sanctions really hurt them badly?
Yes, apparently the sanctions have been progressively tougher on them. And so the oil supplies were affected, the labor remittances were affected. And the economy is actually in a very tight grip. So this is one way to try and get out of sanctions, that you give messages to the world that you are relaxing But I would say that this has been a culmination of last 3 months of very hectic diplomatic work, and at the center of that has been South Korea. Because, you know, as the old adage goes, if things go bad, the worst affected will be South Korea. If things were to go according to what the last year's tirade was, you do anything, we do that. You know, that kind of between Trump and the North Korean leader. So the most frightened were South Koreans. So they went about doing it, and they went systematically. They went and met China, Xi Jinping in China. Then they've been in constant touch with Washington. Like 2 days back on Tuesday, South Korea sent its NSA to meet Bolton in Washington to brief them. Now, tomorrow they are going to meet the North Korean. So this is a kind of a very systematic diplomatic process. And North Korean messages so far have been, sound bites have been good and positive.
Sure.
There are also, wheels within wheels. For instance, the Chinese press has come out to say that the North Korean announcement that they are closing the test site may have to do with the collapsing of the test site, because the last tests which were done, which they claimed to be thermonuclear, they were so bad that the whole site collapsed. So there cannot be any more tests on that site. So they are closing that site. As for the stopping of the tests and the missile tests, it is not the first time they have done it. They have said it before also. When the Six Nation talk started, that time also they said, we are going to stop it. Then the last summit 11 years back, at that time also there was this whole idea about stopping it. So to an extent, one has to keep one's fingers crossed what the North Koreans were up to. But the fact remains that this is unprecedented in the so far in the last 20-30 years history, that the initiative is coming from North Korea. In the past, it has been always like Jimmy Carter came out with the initiative, or in Clinton's time, he sent Albright to North Korea. So every time there was a lot of initiative from the American side trying to calm the situation. This time it seems to be North Korea. And the way they have talked to, like he visited Xi Jinping in Beijing last month. So the Chinese also have been supportive.
Sure, sure.
So it's like all parties, all the essential factors in the Six Nation dialogue are in favor of this summit, which is taking place.
And the pieces seem to be falling in place, at least for the time being.
Yes.
Okay. Professor, let me come across to you now. You know, what is the history of the problem between the North and South, and how has it impacted the lives of the people living in both North and South Korea?
South and North Korea, they are at, you can say, loggerhead with each other for almost, I think, 70 years. And it started with division, then they had Korean War, and because of that, lots of family, they got separated. Korean people, both sides, they were taught by their regimes to hate each other. Usually political leaders, they got their legitimacy to show that, look, they are against North Korea, or they are against South Korea kind of thing. So people suffered a lot. So in that sense, it has been a very painful, you can say, history of rivalry between South and North Korea. But with the coming of nuclear issue, because gradually in their competition with each other, South Korea got ahead in economic development, even in military capacity also, conventional term. They got ahead with North Korea. But when North Korea had nuclear arsenals, or nuclear, you can say, program of weaponization, they had some way compensated that, you can say, imbalance. And then I think things started going differently. South Korean general policy has been to contain North Korea. So when Kim Dae-jung came to power in 1997, who got Peace Prize also for his effort to improve inter-Korea relations, that time he got Peace Prize because he said that, look, we had a policy of containment of North Korea for so many decades and it has been not successful. So let's try something different. He talked about engagement, he talked about sunshine policy, and he started trying to reach out North Korea. So Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, his next you can say successor, both of them, they had summit meet with North Korea in 2000 and 2007. Both were successful to an extent, but still they were not able to denuclearize North Korea. Though many experts, they blame South Korean policy for that, but I think I would blame George Bush Jr. administration in the United States, who was very aggressive to North Koreans. And that way, I think North Koreans, they were not having enough trust to denuclearize themselves. I think then 2007 onwards, I think we know that there had been no contact with top leaders of South and North Korea. This is the third summit meet which is going to have between South and North Korea. This time also, as I think my previous speaker, they told you, that the trust is going to be very important. So even if no substantial achievement, no, you can say big achievements are basically garnered from this summit, if somehow April summit between South and North Korean leader and May summit between American and North Korean leader, if somehow they can create some kind of trust between all these parties, I think that would be a very, very important beginning. Sure. If they are not able to do that, all these technicality that they have announced something, they have declared something, they are ready to talk, all these technical and basic initiatives, they would not be much meaningful until unless the trust is developed.
Sure. Trust is the key word there as far as the relationship is concerned. Ambassador, what can we expect when Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un actually sit at the table and meet and have their bilateral? Can we expect free heart-to-heart talks, or can we expect a lot of posturing?
Well, there'll be a bit of both, I think. But this is, you could say that this summit is like the opening moves in a chess game. Whatever moves they make are then going to determine the state of play for the rest of the game. And therefore, if it really goes bad, then it can impact everything else, which is why I think that both sides would be careful to ensure that there is at least positive atmospherics, and that, they can make the announcement that this is the beginning of a process, I would imagine. I don't think that we could expect outcomes without detailed negotiations between juniors when leaders meet at the head of state level to kick off something. But what you can expect is that it could be the beginning of a process. Then there will be very complicated and very difficult negotiations, because when North Korea talks of denuclearization, or even China, they talk of US nuclear weapons and bombers in South Korea as well. Would the US agree to put its nuclear weapons on the line? Would North Korea agree to leave US nuclear weapons out? Secondly, I think, as my panelist Shilkant Sharma has said, the North would have every incentives to stretch out the process of they can't agree to denuclearization very early, because they've seen what happened to Gaddafi and they've seen what happened to the Iran deal. So I doubt that they are going to repose a great deal of trust for early denuclearization.
Do you believe
they
all
could
these
stretch it.
Contentious issues are going to be on the table?
Not maybe at the first summit, but I think the effort would be to start a process, to agree on the agenda of that process, what will be the substance, and to have different, groups which will work on these different elements,
Sure.
The peace agreement, the denuclearization issue, reduction of military tensions, which might be easier to work on than the other two, maybe beginning with that, and simultaneous perhaps economic cooperation. But the West would probably like to delay economic cooperation until such time as they have some earnest of good intent on the denuclearization issue. And on the other hand, the North Korean effort would be to try to get an easing of sanctions and cooperation up front.
Indeed.
So it's going to be a tough negotiation, but the positive is that, you know,
they are negotiating.
They are negotiating.
Yes.
They are not thundering away and threatening to, you know, bring the world to the brink of nuclear war.
Sure, indeed. You know, taking the discussion forward now, you know, Captain Lele, as far as the political system in the North is concerned, how has it impacted the world and maybe peace on Earth?
I think one has to look at it slightly in a different fashion, because North always should not be considered as a villain, because there was a major amount of a power politics which was being played by using North and South as a proxy by the erstwhile USSR and US also. So one has to understand the historical baggage which we are carrying over here. When today we are talking of a direct confrontation or a direct talks between two Koreas, earlier you had seen through the talks between six-party delegations. So many things have been tried and tested, but nothing has worked out. I will not blame only North for failure of a talks for all these years, because everybody was trying to use North for the purposes of their power politics. There are few people who are of the opinion that the way China uses Pakistan to engage India, in the similar fashion for China, North Korea is an important constituent to keep the US at a bay. So definitely there is a good amount of a global power politics, but tomorrow's talks, I think I will say that it will be more of a feel-good factor, where people are going to talk with each other, shake hands with each other, exchange pleasantries, and start moving on. If you see the pattern of a talk which is going to take place tomorrow, till pre-lunch, the talks will be there. Then for the lunch, both the Korean leaders will depart. There will not be a joint lunch. The North Korean leader will go back to his country for the lunch and get back for the post-lunch discussions. That means there is a certain amount of an indication that he will regroup with his own people, take a call on what has happened in the morning talks, and based on that, I think the evening talks will progress.
Sure.
So people have planned it out pretty well, and I'm sure at least some forward movement will be visible.
Okay, some forward movement will be visible. It's a very well planned out summit is what Captain Lele is suggesting. You know, taking the discussion forward, Ambassador Sharma, you know, what is it that the North would like to take away from this summit?
You know, I'd like to say first that the North has been a bit smart. You know, they have done a number of things which are quite smart. For instance, they agreed right away to not to insist on the withdrawal of the US troops. They agreed also not to make rough weather out of the joint exercises, which the Koreans themselves have agreed to, you know, hold in suspension. The third thing which they have done is that if North and South begin to talk, then the kernel of the dispute is diminished. So, you know, like the old saying, Mia Bibi Raji kya karega Kazi. So, if North and South are actually together, or are talking in a direction which is difficult to find fault with, then the US position to that extent is weakened, because what will they then? They cannot just insist that no, you do this. So in that respect, North has been smart, and that's the reason why South Korea has been going back and forth between Seoul and DC to keep their US partners fully informed about what's happening. Given this kind of build-up, they have to succeed tomorrow. I think failure will impinge very badly on North Korea, and it will impinge very badly or much worse on South Korea, because Moon has put his prestige on that.
Sure.
So this is how I see it. Then there is no one among the people who are supporting this or, you know, undergirding this, no one who is actually skeptical, except for David Albrights of the world, or some of these non-pro fundamentalists in the US who are now coming out, you know, with things from their closet. Like Albright has come out saying, oh, North Korea is producing graphite, and you know, and graphite is used for reactors which are actually more useful for fissile material for bombs. So there's a lot of write-up about graphite. then same way this whole business about the their missile tests and their capability, and the thing about the collapsing of the test site. So these things probably tend to diminish the worth of the concessions which right away North Korea has been willing to give.
Sure.
Then there are other things like, there are low-hanging fruits, or I wouldn't say low-hanging fruits. There are things like returning of the kidnapped persons, like Americans or the Japanese, for instance. Japan is the one who's feeling out in the cold in this.
Yeah.
So, because they are worried that if these two make peace, then the Koreans also have a thing against Japan, historically. So Japan worries about it. And Japanese are also trapped in North Korea. They want to get them back.
Sure.
And there is this whole story about the moves, as Ambassador Shankar was mentioning, that there's this mango mousse which is going to be served, which has a map of Korea, in unified Korea, as well as the islands which Japan claims to be its own. So these are all these very little bubbles which are coming.
Right.
But to me, the summit seems to be prepared in a way that failure or a setback seems to be less probable.
Okay, setback seems to be less probable is what you're suggesting. Professor, what would the South like to take away from the summit?
I think, as mentioned by most of the speakers, this is basically the summit and the next summit, which is going to happen in May. Both the summits are basically crafted by South Korean policymakers, and South Korean policymakers like Moon Jae-in himself.
So the credit solely goes to the South Koreans is what you're suggesting, because Trump, on the other hand, has been saying that, whatever is happening in North Korea is because of the sanctions that the US has imposed, and it's because of me, he has said.
I will tell you, I have been studying about South Korea, and that's my observation, that Moon Jae-in himself, then Chung Eui-yong, who is basically National Security Advisory, actually Chief National Security Advisor of South Korea, Seo-hun, basically, who is Chief of National Intelligence Services of South Korea, Moon Jung-in, a professor who is basically Special Advisor to President on National Security issue. There's another person called Choi Jong-guk, actually, who is basically Special Advisor to National Security. So I think all these people whom I know, they have been working hard when Moon Jae-in came to power. And you remember, 15th of August 2017, Moon Jae-in made a speech saying that, look, nobody is allowed to wage a war on Korean Peninsula without our permission. So basically, they had some disagreement with American approach. So they have been doing it. But at the same time, they have to also project as if this is basically done by Trump. Because, Trump is very short, you can say. He becomes very, you can say, quite early, quite easily he could be angry, and he could be so that's the problem which they have been. So I think South Korea has been doing it very carefully. Lots of capable people, they are involved, and they have to do everything. At the same time, they have to project as if Americans are being the prime mover in this whole phenomena. So I think the takeaway from South Korea, I think the basic things which I think in the beginning remark Mr. Shankar mentioned, that they want to have a kind of, not peace agreement, actually peace agreement is impossible without Americans, but at least they could have peace declaration.
Okay.
Then they could have some, you can say, declaration about intent of North Korea to denuclearize in future course. Plus, they could have something about reunion of family. They could have, so basically it's reconnecting South and North Korea, rebuilding trust, and trying to persuade North Korea that, look, we are not having any, you can say, punitive intent.
Sure.
And you need to trust us. If you trust us, finally, we could have some mechanism to deal with actually your nuclear issue, deal with your security and other threat perception issues.
Sure. Okay.
So that would be, I think, the intent of South Koreans.
Let me now get quick closing comments from all my guests, beginning with you, Ambassador Shankar. Is this the semi-final before the big finale, the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump?
Yes, because at the end of the day, the Americans will have to be on board for any agreement which the North and the South may work out amongst themselves. And from the North Korean side also, there has always been this demand for direct talks with the US, and for the US to accept the North as an equal interlocutor on the table. Now, there President Trump has done an about turn and accepted this, and there have also been clandestine contacts between his government. He has declared that his director of the CIA, former director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, had visited North Korea and engaged them in some kind of dialogues, or if visited North Korea, or at least had a dialogue with the North, and that the outcome of the dialogue seemed positive at that stage. So I think President Trump is also staking a lot, because from a position of taking a very tough stance, he's suddenly done this about turn. So he's also staking quite a bit in terms of his reputation to get something through negotiations. But he's also de-risking by saying, we have to wait and see. We really don't know how it's going to go.
That's the approach as far as the Americans are concerned. Captain Lele, how are China and Japan, the other players in the region, going to look at everything that's happening?
I think Japan is slightly skeptical. Of all the players in the region, I think Japan is very skeptical because they are banking much on the history that North Korea has always deceived the international community when it actually comes to the negotiations. But to my mind, this will be more of an exercise where you should not expect anything immediately about denuclearization. Since it is between North and South, people will talk of a culture, people will talk of a family reunification and other issues. So I think more of the softer issues which will be there.
Softer issues on the table as far as the summit is concerned is what you're suggesting. Ambassador Sharma, is this North Korea just trying to buy time and, you know, trying to have all these summits before something big?
There are two ways to look at it. One is that deja vu, like what North Korea has done in the past. They've always gone for talks and buy time. And so that could be one way for the skeptics. The other way is that the kind of talks which are coming out from North Korea and its supporters, if their nuclear status is acknowledged, if somehow the other, the South Koreans and the Americans in the middle of these talks this month or next month do not question North Koreans' claim to be a nuclear weapon state, because this is what they're saying now. They're saying we have completed our nuclear preparation. If that is somehow the other acknowledged, that will be a big takeaway for the Kim.
All right.
And but it is $1 million question. One has to see whether they can give him anything like that.
Sure. Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remark.
Yeah, I will say that, you know, the semi-final on this issue had been going on when North Korean team participated in Winter Olympics in South Korea. So semi-final had been going on. I'm not very actually keen about what comes out of this first summit between South Korean and North Korean leader. The actual basically observation must be about the next, which is going to be between Kim Jong-un and Trump. That is going to be the most important and deciding thing.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, that's it from me. See you again next time.